I'm not stepping back. I belong on this dock. She was only 9 when someone hung a wooden tag that read "Outsider" on the rail beside her. The security manager smiled and called it procedure. But what she didn't know, one calm sentence, one witness, and one message would turn that little label into a scandal the whole port couldn't hide. But to understand why Lena Carter didn't move an inch on that dock, we need to go back a little before the wooden tag, before the stairs, before the word outsider ever touched her day. Lena was 9. Quiet in the way some kids are quiet because they're listening to everything. She wasn't the child who fought for attention or argued with grown-ups. If you asked her a question, she'd look up first, and then she'd answer in a small voice that didn't shake. And that wasn't an accident. That was home. Because Lena's dad, Daniel Carter, had a rule, not a trendy mantra, not something printed on a mug. A real rule, the kind a parent repeats until it becomes muscle memory. If you're wrong, you apologize. He'd tell her. And if you're right, you don't bow your head just to make someone comfortable. He didn't teach her to be rude. He taught her to be steady, polite but unmovable, respectful, but not submissive. Because there's a difference, and most people don't learn it until life breaks them a few times. That morning at the private port on the West Coast, the air smelled like salt and fuel and wet rope. The water slapped against the pilings like it was impatient. Forklifts beeped in the distance. Men in reflective vests shouted over engines. And up ahead, past a clean metal gate, was the members-only dock, quiet, guarded, and separated from everybody else like it belonged to a different world. That's what places like this do. They divide space into us and not us. The people with access pass through without thinking. The people without it learn to stand back without being told. Lena stood there with a valid wristband. On paper, she belonged. But people's eyes don't always read paper. They read skin, clothes, posture. They read whatever story makes them feel right. She wore a simple navy hoodie, jeans that were a little faded at the knees, and sneakers that had seen too many playgrounds. Nothing flashy, nothing that announced money. And that was the first problem. Because in a place built on status, looking ordinary can feel like a crime. Hanging from her backpack zipper was a tiny wooden keychain, smooth, hand-carved, shaped like a little boat. Her mom had given it to her the year before and said, "When you miss me, hold this. It'll remind you you're safe, even when I'm not right there." So Lena did. Her fingers found it automatically, like a kid reaching for a blanket. She rubbed the wood with her thumb, grounded herself, and looked at the gate. Now here's the question that should already be pulling at you. Why is a 9-year-old standing at a restricted dock by herself? Why does she have access to a place most adults can't even step onto? And why do the grown-ups around her glance twice, then a third time, like they're watching a mistake unfold? Because Lena wasn't supposed to be there. Not in their minds. In their minds? Children like Lena are visitors. Background. The ones you ignore unless they're in the way. But Lena wasn't in the way. She was exactly where she was told to be. Daniel had arranged for her to meet him at the dock after school ended early. No drama, no secrets, just logistics. The kind of ordinary plan a family makes when a parent is working and time is tight. And Lena, being Lena, followed instructions the way she followed rules at home, carefully, quietly, completely. She approached the scanner. The light blinked. The gate clicked. Simple, clean, official, and still. She felt the weight of eyes. A couple in nice jackets paused mid-conversation. A worker near a cart slowed down. Someone laughed softly, one of those laughs that isn't joy, it's judgment. Lena noticed it all, because quiet kids always do. She didn't shrink, she didn't puff up either. She just stood straight, shoulders relaxed, chin level. The way her dad had shown her in the mirror once and said, "This is what it looks like when you don't ask for permission to exist." Lena took one more breath and stepped forward, still holding that little wooden boat, unaware that somewhere nearby, someone was already deciding that her presence needed to be corrected. And that's the thing about places built on hierarchy. Even when you have the right badge, even when you followed every rule, there will always be someone who thinks the real rule is this: you only belong if they say you do. So as Lena moved toward the dock, calm and quiet, and completely within her rights, one question hovered over the water like fog. What happens when a child refuses to step back from a place she's earned, and an adult decides to make her pay for it? But right now, back at that gate, Lena hadn't even taken 5 steps onto the members' dock before a voice stopped the air. "Hold on." It wasn't shouted. It was polished, the kind of tone that sounds reasonable even when it isn't. And when Lena turned, she saw Martha Cole walking toward her like she owned the walkway. Crisp security jacket. Badge angled just right. A professional smile that said, "I'm here to keep things orderly." But Lena didn't feel protected. She felt picked. Martha glanced at the wristband, then at Lena's face, then back at the wristband again, like the two didn't match in her mind. "Sweetie," she said, "syrup smooth. This area is restricted. Can I see your access?" Lena lifted her wrist, exactly as she'd been taught. Martha scanned it once. The device beeped green. That should have been the end. But Martha didn't step aside. She didn't say, "You're all set." Instead, she tilted her head. "And who are you here with today?" A friendly question on the outside, a challenge underneath. Lena swallowed. "My dad. He's meeting me." Martha nodded slowly. "Okay. And what's his name?" Lena answered. Martha didn't write it down. She didn't call anyone. She simply raised the scanner again. "Let's check that one more time," she said, smiling wider. "Just to be sure, beep." Green, still not enough, because this wasn't about security. It was about comfort. Martha's comfort, and the comfort of the people nearby who wanted the world to stay in its usual order. She waved another guard over. Not urgently, casually. "Can you verify this access?" Martha asked, loud enough for others to hear. And that's when the dock changed. Conversations lowered. Footsteps slowed. Eyes turned. No one said anything. But their faces asked the same question Martha had been asking since she arrived. "Do you belong here?" Lena felt it in her chest. She was 9, not blind. Her fingers tightened around the little wooden boat keychain on her backpack, the one her mom had given her. It steadied her. Martha kept talking, still polite, still by the book. "We have standards here," she said. "We've had incidents. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal. Those words have covered up more cruelty than any insult ever has. Because the ugliest bias rarely shows up with an obvious slur. It shows up dressed as policy, as procedure, as someone saying, 'I'm just doing my job,' while they quietly decide you don't fit the picture of who gets to pass. Rules are supposed to protect people, but in the wrong hands, rules become a mask clean, respectable, and hard to argue with in public. Martha never had to say, 'You don't belong.' She could let protocol say it for her. And if Lena protested, Martha would look like the reasonable adult dealing with a difficult child. Martha leaned in slightly, lowering her voice like she was offering help. "Why don't you wait over there?" she said, pointing toward the public side of the gate. "We'll sort this out. It'll just take a moment. That's how it starts. Not with a shove, with a suggestion. Lena didn't move. She looked at the green light on the scanner, then at the watching faces, then back to Martha. Her heart was hammering, but her voice stayed steady. "My pass is valid," she said. Martha's eyes flickered half a second of surprise, then annoyance, then the smile returned. Tighter. "Of course," Martha said. "But we have to verify. That's policy. A harmless word, until it's used like a weapon that never gets blamed." And while Martha repeated the same reasonable lines, the real punishment was already happening. It was the public doubt, the slow isolation, the way a child starts wondering if the world is right and she's the mistake. Across the dock, by the fish stalls, Rachel Moore watched from behind a stack of ice-packed crates. But she recognized the scene instantly. The unnecessary second scan, the extra questions, the authority spoken just loud enough to recruit the crowd. Rachel's first instinct wasn't heroism, it was survival. Don't get involved. Don't make it worse. That instinct has kept a lot of people safe, and it has let a lot of cruelty grow. Martha straightened up and let her voice carry, like a verdict delivered with a smile. "I'm going to need you to step back until we confirm your authorization." There it was. Not a request anymore, a command. And in that moment, procedure stopped being neutral. It started becoming a sentence handed down in front of witnesses who would later say they didn't know what to do. Lena held her ground, the wooden boat digging into her fingers, because she could feel it. This wasn't about checking a wristband. This was about teaching a child her place, and Martha was just getting started. Martha didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. She didn't touch Lena. Instead, she did something quieter, cleaner, crueler. She turned slightly and spoke to one of the dock workers behind her, like she was ordering coffee. "Hang the notice here," she said softly. The man hesitated. "Here. Yes. Right on the rail, where people can see it." He nodded and walked off. Lena didn't understand at first. She thought maybe it was another sign, another boring rule, another adult thing that had nothing to do with her. Then she saw it. A small wooden tag, rough edges, cheap string, one word carved into it. Outsider. Not written on her wrist, not said to her face, displayed, public, permanent, like a label on an object that didn't belong on the shelf. For a moment, Lena didn't move. Children don't always cry when they're hurt. Sometimes they freeze. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders lifted just a little, like she was bracing against cold water. She looked at the tag, then at the people, then back at the tag. The dock was quiet now. Not silent, but that strange quiet where no one speaks because everyone is watching. A couple near the gate pretended to check their phones. A man loading crates shifted his weight and looked away. Someone whispered. Lena felt the heat in her face, the sting behind her eyes. She didn't wipe it. She didn't ask why. She walked to the rail. Her hands were shaking. Small hands. Careful hands. She untied the string. The wood scraped against her knuckles. She flinched, but she didn't drop it. She didn't run. She stood there holding the word like it weighed something. Behind her, Martha crossed her arms, still smiling, still professional, still protected by the costume of authority. And that's when Tom Willis saw everything. Tom had been unloading equipment near the edge of the dock, 34 years old, 2 kids, a mortgage that never waited, a boss who replaced people without blinking. He saw the tag, he saw the girl's hands, he knew it was wrong. Every part of him knew, but his body didn't move, because Tom also knew what happened to people who caused trouble. He knew about schedules getting cut, about attitude problems written in reports, about being quietly pushed out. So he did what most people do when fear argues louder than conscience. He stayed still. And in that stillness, something else happened. Something uncomfortable. Something most stories don't talk about. The truth is, cruelty rarely grows alone. It grows in rooms full of people who look away. Martha didn't carve the tag herself. She didn't tie the string. But she watched. And Tom watched. And the couple by the gate watched. And the doc watched. Not because they were evil, but because they were afraid. Afraid of losing their place. Afraid of becoming the next problem. Afraid of being the one singled out. So they chose the safer role. The quiet one. The invisible one. Silence doesn't make someone a villain, but it quietly removes them from the list of people who tried. History remembers the one who harmed. It remembers the one who was harmed, but it almost never remembers the third person, the one who stood close enough to stop it and didn't. If Tom had taken one step forward, if he had said, "This isn't right," if he had used his voice the way he used his hands to lift crates every day, Lena would not have stood there holding that word. Life doesn't demand heroes, but sometimes it asks something smaller. Don't turn your back, because between cruelty and dignity, there is no safe middle, only choices made out loud, or choices made in silence. Lena lowered her eyes to the wooden tag. Her fingers tightened around her little boat keychain. Her throat burned. She wanted her dad. She wanted her mom. She wanted to be anywhere else, but she didn't move. Martha finally spoke again. "This is just temporary," she said lightly. "Until we sort things out? Temporary." As if humiliation has an expiration date, as if a child forgets being labeled in front of strangers. Lena lifted her head. Her voice was quiet. But it didn't break. I didn't do anything wrong. Everyone heard her. No one answered. And in that moment, the doc made its choice. Not with words, with distance, with silence, with eyes that slid away. Lena stood there alone in the open, holding a piece of wood that told her the world had already decided where she belonged. And somewhere across the dock. Rachel Moore stopped pretending not to see, because she recognized that look on the child's face. She had worn it herself once, and she remembered exactly how heavy silence felt. Rachel had been standing near her cart, pretending to sort ice and fish, but her eyes never left the dock. She saw the wooden tag in Lena's hands. She saw the way the child's shoulders tightened, and something in her chest twisted, not with surprise, but with recognition, because this wasn't new to Rachel. Years ago, before she had her own stall, she had stood in almost the same place, different day, same feeling, the same polite voice telling her she probably didn't belong. And back then, Rachel had stepped back. She had swallowed it. She had told herself it wasn't worth the trouble. She had gone home and cried alone. So when she saw Lena holding that tag, Rachel knew exactly what was happening, and she knew what would happen if no one moved. The doc would forget. The child would not. Rachel wiped her hands on her apron and took one slow breath. Not the breath of anger, the breath of decision. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She walked the way people walk when they know they are right. She stopped beside Lena, not in front of her, not behind her, beside her. Martha turned. "Ma'am, this area is restricted." Rachel kept her voice calm. "She has a valid pass, and you are humiliating her." Simple words. Heavy truth. People nearby stopped pretending to be busy. Everyone heard it. Martha straightened. "I'm following protocol." Rachel nodded. "Then follow it correctly." She reached into her pocket and unlocked her phone quietly. She checked the time. She noted the gate. She watched who stood where. This wasn't loud courage. This was careful courage. Rachel leaned toward Lena. "You didn't do anything wrong." Lena looked up, still scared, but not alone, Martha said. "You're interfering with security," Rachel answered. "Then call your supervisor." That changed everything, because silence was replaced with process. Martha spoke into her radio, confirming a minor at Dock 3. Rachel typed it in her notes. Dock 3, time, radio call, truth needs structure. Rachel remembered how it felt when she had none, how small the world becomes when you are alone inside a lie. She would not let that happen again. Martha glanced at her. "This doesn't concern you." Rachel met her eyes. "It concerns anyone who sees a child being singled out." The dock shifted. People leaned closer. Injustice hates witnesses. Rachel didn't insult. She didn't accuse. She made it factual. Martha tried again. "We're being cautious," Rachel replied. "Caution protects safety. This damages dignity." There was a pause. Lena held her keychain tighter. Rachel remembered gripping a crate once, pretending it was normal. She straightened. "I've seen this before, and I stayed quiet. I won't do that again." This wasn't only about Lena. It was about Rachel choosing a different ending. Martha turned back to her radio, but her certainty was gone. Rachel's phone stayed ready. Lena was no longer alone. Courage doesn't always shout. Sometimes it stands still. Sometimes it speaks calmly. If you are ever in a moment like this, remember 3 things. Notice details. Speak to authority, not ego. Stay with the person being targeted. You don't need to be loud. You need to be present. Rachel had learned that once too late. She wasn't going to learn it twice. Martha looked at Lena again, not with confidence, but calculation. And that meant something had changed, because when witnesses arrive, power rearranges itself, not loudly, but permanently. Rachel placed her body slightly closer to Lena, not touching her, not crowding her, but close enough that anyone watching understood the message. This child was not isolated anymore. This child had an adult standing with her, and that alone changed the temperature of the space. Lena's breathing slowed. She still held the wooden tag, but her grip was different now, not tight with fear, firm with resolve. Rachel spoke again, quietly. "You belong where you are standing." Those words were not for Martha. They were for the child. Martha shifted her weight. Authority doesn't like being questioned without drama. It doesn't like being challenged by calm. She tried one more time. "We are responsible for order here," Rachel nodded. "And I'm responsible for being human." The dock felt smaller now, closer, like every person standing there was part of the moment. Someone cleared their throat. Witnesses were forming. Rachel kept her eyes forward. Steady. Because when you look around for approval, you give your power away. Martha realized she was no longer performing control. She was being observed. And that is the position power hates the most. Lena lifted her head higher. Rachel noticed. And she smiled. Enough for a child to feel supported. No shouting, no chaos, just a line drawn, gently and firmly, in front of a 9-year-old who deserved better. Lena didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't try to convince Martha. Because in that moment, she understood something most adults never learn. Arguing with power only feeds it. Truth doesn't need volume. It needs clarity. Her fingers tightened around the wooden tag for a second. Then she lowered it and slipped it into her hoodie pocket. Not because she accepted it, but because she didn't want it to define the next move. She reached into her backpack and pulled out her phone. Rachel noticed immediately. Not panic, not drama, just intention. Lena opened the camera. Her hands were still shaking, but her frame was steady. She took a photo of the outsider tag in her pocket, then one of the rail where it had been hanging, then one of her wristband, close enough to show the ID number, clear enough to show it was valid. Click, click, click. She switched to video and lifted the phone slightly, not pointing it at Martha, not accusing, just capturing the space, the dock, the gate, the people watching, the atmosphere. 10 seconds. That was all she needed. Then she opened a message thread. Dad, Daniel Carter was not the kind of man who panicked. He wasn't loud, he wasn't dramatic, he was precise, on boards, in negotiations, in systems that only responded to structure. Lena typed slowly. They put a sign that says outsider on me. I have my pass. They are trying to move me. She attached the photos, then the video. She didn't write, I'm scared. She didn't write, help me. She named the situation. And that's the difference between calling for rescue and calling for truth across the city. Daniel's phone vibrated. He was in a meeting, papers on the table, people speaking. He glanced down. One look at the images, and the room disappeared. Not because he was angry, because he recognized a pattern. He typed back immediately. Where are you? Who is doing this? Is there a witness? Do you still have the sign? 4 questions. Not emotional, structural, because emotion tells you something is wrong. Structure proves it. Lena read the message. Her heart was beating fast, but her mind was steady. She typed, Doc 3, Martha Cole. Rachel is here. Yes. Daniel closed his laptop. Excuse me, he said calmly to the room. I have a matter that requires immediate attention. No one argued. Power recognizes urgency when it's named correctly. Back at the dock, Martha had no idea what had just been set in motion. She stepped closer. Put the phone away. This isn't appropriate. Rachel spoke first. She's documenting. Martha frowned. That's unnecessary. Lena lifted her eyes. It's accurate. Everyone heard her, and that word mattered. Not fair, not nice. Accurate. Because fairness is debatable. Accuracy is measurable. Martha folded her arms. You're delaying procedure. Lena answered softly. I'm recording it. There was a pause. This was no longer a child being moved. This was a record being created. And that changes how power behaves. Daniel's response came in seconds. Do not leave. Do not argue. Stay where you are. I'm activating the port office. That was it. No comfort language, no reassurance, because he knew his daughter didn't need soothing. She needed alignment. Rachel leaned closer. You're doing exactly right. Lena nodded. Martha tried again. You can't stay here. Lena didn't respond. She lifted the phone and recorded. Silence. That's when the truth became clear. This wasn't a disagreement. This was a documentation. And documentation terrifies abuse of power, because arguments disappear, but records remain. Daniel sent another message. Is Martha still in charge? Has anyone else been notified? Lena typed. Not yet, Daniel replied. They will be. And he meant the system. Not because he was powerful, but because he knew how power was supposed to be used. This was the difference between 2 kinds of confrontation. One is emotional, 2 people shouting, each trying to win. The other is structural, 1 person naming reality until the system has no choice but to respond. Lena wasn't fighting Martha. She was building a case. Martha looked around. People were no longer avoiding eye contact. They were watching. Some were uneasy. Some were curious. Rachel stood still. Tom had stopped pretending to work. Witnesses were forming. Martha spoke into her radio. "I need confirmation from port control." Lena recorded the radio call. Time, tone, words. Daniel received the update. He typed one last line. "Good. Stay calm. You've done your part." And for the first time, Lena allowed herself to breathe deeper. Not because it was over, but because she knew she had acted with clarity. This wasn't a child begging an adult to stop. This was a child establishing the truth. And truth, when recorded, forces systems to answer. Martha still believed she was in control. She had no idea she had already lost it, because control exists in silence. And silence had ended. Lena slipped her phone back into her pocket. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She stood. And in that stillness, she wasn't waiting to be saved. She was waiting for the system to catch up to the truth she had already named. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He didn't demand. He activated the system. Within minutes of reading Lena's message, he was already on a call with port operations. Not as a father, not as a man protecting his child, but as a board member invoking protocol. "Dock 3 is compromised," he said calmly. "A minor with valid access has been publicly humiliated. Evidence has been recorded. I am requesting immediate suspension of on-site authority to preserve the scene." Those words mattered, not because they were emotional, because they were procedural, and systems only respond when you speak their language. Back at the dock, the air shifted before anyone could explain why. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels alert. Rachel felt it first. Tom felt it second. Martha felt it last. Martha was still standing with her arms folded, still convinced this was under control, still convinced that authority meant immunity. Then 2 port officials appeared at the gate, not rushing, not aggressive, just unmistakably official. One held a tablet, the other carried a radio. "Martha Cole," one of them asked. She straightened immediately. "Yes, you are being temporarily relieved of your duties pending investigation." The words landed heavy. Not loud, not dramatic. "Final." Martha blinked. "On what grounds protocol breach?" The man replied. "Possible discrimination. Evidence has been submitted." Martha laughed once, a short, disbelieving sound. "That's ridiculous. I was following procedure." The second official looked at the tablet. Procedure does not include labeling a child in public. The dock went still. Everyone heard that. Lena held her phone quietly. Rachel felt her breath catch. Tom stared at the ground. Martha tried to regain footing. "This is being misunderstood." "Then the evidence will clarify." The official said. That was it. Not an argument, not a debate, a process. They extended a hand. "Your access badge." "Please." Martha hesitated. For the first time, she wasn't in control of the timing. She removed her badge and handed it over. The click of it deactivating echoed louder than any shout could have, because that sound meant authority had shifted. This wasn't about who was right anymore. It was about what could be proven. Rachel finally understood something that day that most people never do. Power hates confrontation, but it fears evidence. Because confrontation can be dismissed, evidence becomes permanent. Martha's voice changed. "I was trying to maintain order." The official nodded. "Order does not humiliate children." Martha looked around, suddenly aware of how many eyes were on her. The witnesses she had ignored were now the structure holding her accountable. Lena had not shouted. Rachel had not attacked. Daniel had not threatened. They had built a case, and that was stronger than anger. This is where the story turns, because justice does not arrive with drama. It arrives with documentation. 4 elements came together in that moment. First evidence, the wooden outsider tag, the photos, the video, the record of the radio call. Without that, nothing sticks. Second witnesses, Rachel, Tom, the dock workers, the port staff who saw the suspension. Justice does not exist in isolation. It requires shared reality. Third authority higher than the abuser, not arguing with Martha, but moving above her. Systems can only correct themselves when challenged from within their own structure. Fourth consequences, immediate, visible, official, suspension, investigation, loss of control, without consequence. Truth becomes a story. With consequence, it becomes law. That is how injustice closes. Martha tried once more. This is an overreaction. The official answered simply, "It's procedure." And for the first time, that word worked against her. Procedure. The very shield she had used was now the standard by which she was judged. Lena watched quietly, not with triumph, not with anger, with clarity. Rachel knelt slightly beside her. "You did exactly what was needed," Lena whispered. "I just told what happened, and that was enough." Martha was escorted away from the gate, not in handcuffs, not in disgrace, but in silence. The kind that means something has shifted, the kind that means a pattern has been broken. Tom looked at Lena for a moment, then nodded. Not an apology, not courage, but acknowledgement. And sometimes, acknowledgement is the first crack in indifference. Daniel's final message came through. "It's done. The system is moving." Lena read it and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Not because she felt powerful, but because she felt correct. And there is a difference. Power dominates. Correctness stands. That dock had been a small place, but in that moment, it became a courtroom. Evidence, witnesses, authority, consequence, 4 elements, no shouting, no violence, no revenge, just truth, organized. And that is what those who abuse power fear most. Not anger, not exposure, structure, because once truth becomes structure, it cannot be ignored. The system had done its job. Martha was suspended. The investigation was moving forward. Protocols were activated. Reports were filed. And consequences were finally real. But justice on paper is not the same as peace in a child's heart. Because after the noise fades, after the authority steps in, after the wrong is named and addressed, there is always a quieter question left behind. One that only children ask. Was it my fault Lena didn't say it out loud at first? She didn't need to. It lived in the way her shoulders stayed tight, in the way her hands kept gripping her jacket, in the way her eyes no longer wandered freely around the dock. She had done everything right. She followed the rules. She stayed calm. She told the truth. And still, something inside her felt unsure. That's the part most people don't talk about. When a child is mistreated, even if the system corrects it, the child still wonders if they somehow caused it. Daniel saw it the moment he reached her. Not in her tears, not in her words, but in her silence. So he didn't start with a lecture. He didn't explain policies or consequences. He didn't say, "You were brave," or "You were strong." He opened his arms. Lena stepped into them without hesitation. That hug lasted longer than necessary. Not because Daniel needed it, because Lena did. He rested his chin lightly on her head and spoke quietly, so only she could hear. "You didn't do anything wrong." She didn't answer. "You didn't cause this. Still nothing. You belong wherever you are allowed to stand." Her breathing changed. And then she whispered, "But she made it look like I didn't." Daniel pulled back just enough to see her face. People can make things look wrong even when they aren't. That doesn't make them true. He didn't say it like a lesson. He said it like a fact. They left the dock together. Not in a rush. Not in triumph. Just moving towards something normal. Because after trauma, normal is healing. That night, Daniel did something simple, something traditional, something powerful. He made dinner. Not a special dinner, not a celebratory one, just Lena's favorite food. Warm, familiar, predictable. They sat at the table. They ate slowly. They talked about nothing important. And that was the point. Safety is not rebuilt through speeches. It is rebuilt through routine. Later, when Lena was calmer, she finally asked the question she had been holding. "Did I make her mad?" Daniel answered immediately, "No." "Did I do something to make her do that?" "No." "Then why did she?" Daniel paused. Not because he didn't know, but because he knew how heavy the answer was. Because sometimes adults choose comfort over fairness, and that choice hurts people who don't deserve it. Lena thought about that. So she was wrong. Yes. Not me. Never you. That was the moment Lena needed. Not justice, not proof, reassurance. Meanwhile, Rachel stood outside the house, unsure if she should even be there. She had replayed the scene at the dock in her mind over and over. Not what she did, but what she hadn't done before. Because this wasn't the first time she had seen Martha push someone aside. It was just the first time she refused to stay silent. When Daniel opened the door, Rachel looked smaller than she ever had. "I don't want to make this harder," she said. I need to say something to her." Daniel nodded and stepped aside. Rachel knelt in front of Lena, lowering herself to her level. "I'm not here to tell you I was brave," she said softly. "I wasn't?" Lena watched her carefully. "I'm here to say I was wrong before. I saw something like this once, and I didn't speak up. And I regret it." Lena frowned slightly. "Why didn't you?" Rachel swallowed, because it was easier to stay quiet than to be uncomfortable. "Did it feel bad?" "Yes," Rachel said. "For a long time." She looked Lena in the eyes. "I don't want you to ever think you were alone today. Even when I hesitated, you weren't alone. And I won't hesitate again." Lena considered that. Then she said, "You stood next to me." Rachel smiled faintly. "I should have done it sooner. But you did it," Lena replied. That mattered more than Rachel realized. Healing isn't about perfection. It's about presence. And the most important thing Rachel did wasn't confronting Martha. It was acknowledging her own silence. That taught Lena something no lecture ever could, that grown-ups can be wrong and still choose to be better. Later that night, Lena lay in bed, holding the small wooden keychain her mother had given her. She traced the edges slowly, not because she was afraid, but because she was grounding herself. That's how children heal. Through touch, through familiarity, through quiet reassurance. The system had punished wrongdoing, but love was doing the harder work. Because justice corrects behavior, healing restores belief, and belief is fragile in children. It can be shaken by one moment of humiliation, but it can be rebuilt by 1,000 moments of care. Daniel understood that. Rachel understood that. And slowly, Lena began to understand it too. She didn't need to feel powerful. She didn't need to feel victorious. She needed to feel safe. She needed to feel seen. She needed to feel that the world was still a place where fairness could exist, and that work didn't belong to the system. It belonged to the people who loved her. Lena didn't win because her father held power. She didn't win because the system suddenly grew a conscience. And she didn't win because someone felt sorry for her. Lena won because she refused to step down from what was right. And because, in the moment it mattered, someone chose to stand beside her. That's what people miss when they look at stories like this. They see the authority. They see the consequences. They see the paperwork and the suspension and the investigation. But none of that happens unless dignity shows up first. Dignity doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait for approval. It doesn't need credentials. Dignity stands still and says, "This is wrong," even when everything around it wants silence. Lena didn't argue. She didn't shout. She didn't beg. She stayed where she was allowed to stand. That alone forced the system to answer. And Rachel didn't save Lena by being loud. She saved her by being present, by becoming the witness who refuses to look away. That's how change actually starts. Not with power, with posture, not with anger, with clarity, not with revenge, with truth. In every closed space where power operates, there are always 4 roles being played. There is the victim. There is the one who abuses authority. There is the witness who sees it. And there is the system that only moves when all 3 collide. Without the victim, injustice hides. Without the witness, injustice survives. Without evidence, injustice escapes. Without authority, injustice remains symbolic. Justice needs all 4. Lina was the victim who stood firm. Rachel was the witness who stepped forward. Daniel was the authority who demanded accountability. And the evidence turned truth into consequence. That's not luck, that's structure. And here's the uncomfortable part. Most people never fail because they are cruel. They fail because they are quiet. Tom wasn't a villain. He wasn't malicious. He was afraid, and fear kept him still. Martha wasn't loud or chaotic. She hid behind procedure. She used calmness as camouflage. She weaponized professionalism. That's how injustice survives in clean spaces. Through silence that looks polite, through rules that are applied selectively, through authority that never expects to be questioned. So the real question isn't, would I ever treat someone like Martha did? The real question is, who am I when I see it happening? Are you Lena? The one who holds their ground even when they feel small. Are you Rachel? The one who feels the fear, but steps forward anyway? Or are you Tom? The one who knows something is wrong, but hopes someone else will fix it? None of those roles are permanent. They are choices we make again and again. And the most powerful lesson here isn't about power, it's about responsibility. We teach children to know their worth, but we must also teach adults to protect it, because dignity is not fragile. But belief in dignity is. A child can be taught confidence, but if the world keeps humiliating them, confidence cracks. That's why Rachel's apology mattered, not because she was perfect, but because she showed that adults can be accountable, that authority can admit fault, that silence can be corrected, that courage is not about never failing. It's about choosing better after you do. And Daniel didn't use power to dominate. He used it to restore balance. He didn't seek punishment. He sought process. He didn't escalate emotion. He escalated truth. That's what real authority looks like. Calm, precise, unavoidable. It doesn't shout, it documents, it doesn't threaten, it verifies, it doesn't react. It acts. And that's the tradition worth keeping. Teach children to stand straight. Teach adults to stand accountable. Teach kids to know their worth. Teach grown-ups to respect it. Because the strongest systems are not built on fear, they are built on responsibility. So if you ever find yourself in a closed space, a quiet space, a place where power thinks it is unseen, Remember this story. Don't just feel anger. Build structure. Don't just feel sympathy. Become a witness. Don't just hope the system works. Give it what it needs to work. Truth, presence, evidence, authority, 4 links. Without one, justice collapses. And now the question isn't what happened to Lena. The question is what happens when you see something similar. Will you be the child who refuses to step down? Will you be the adult who steps forward? Or will you be the one who steps back and hopes it ends quietly? Because dignity does not whisper. It waits for someone brave enough to protect it. And when it does, even the strongest systems are forced to listen.